anniversary of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association. There's much to celebrate and so much more to do. I'm your moderator, Doug Rutson, president of the International Center for Not-for-Profit Law. I had the pleasure of being engaged in the creation of the mandate, so it's a particular honor to join you today. As you look around at all the Zoom squares, you'll see that I'm joined by a number of esteemed colleagues. Special thanks to the high-level representatives from the European Union, Czechia, and Lithuania who are appearing in person, and to the remarkable group of officials and civil society colleagues who will share critically important perspectives on the mandate. But before we hear from this exceptional group, a few logistical points. First, there's interpretation available in French and Spanish. Attendees can choose a language at the bottom of your screen. Just look for the globe icon. Second, I want to thank everyone who is participating online. We want to hear from you. Accordingly, we'll be using the Slido platform for participants to ask questions, react to one another's questions, and to participate in polls. You'll again see information about this in the Zoom chat. So with those introductory remarks, let's move on to the main event. I have the honor of introducing Clément Voulet, the Special Rapporteur on the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association. Mr. Voulet has been Special Rapporteur since April 2018. He's worked tirelessly as a human rights advocate and defender in his native country of Togo and across Africa and the world. Special Rapporteur Voulet, you're a skilled lawyer, a tireless advocate, and a true civil society champion. Thank you for all you do, Special Rapporteur Voulet. The meeting is yours.
Thank you very much, Doug. Excellencies, colleague, and friend, welcome. I'm honored by the participation of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Czech Republic, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, and the EU Special Representative for Human Rights. I also want to thank Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights. Thank you for joining this conversation. Our panelists from civil society, Ina Gilani, Mireille Tuchiminina, and Claude Samoa, it is an honor to have you here today. I want to thank the Permanent Mission of Czech Republic and Lithuania, OSHA and ACNL for your support to make this event possible. On September 30th, the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association celebrates its 10th anniversary. The mandate was created at a time when the world faced a series of severe crises: financial collapse, rising poverty and inequality, growing intolerance, and the erosion of democracy, just to name few. In this context, the mandate was created by the Human Rights Council under the leadership of the United States and a coalition of diverse countries, including Lithuania, Mexico, and Maldives. This core group of support countries is now under the leadership of the Czech Republic. I thank the core group for their strong commitment and support to this mandate. As I explained in my latest report to Human Rights Council, over these 10 years, my predecessors and I have provided guidance to states and other stakeholders on how best to protect these fundamental freedoms. Our work has contributed to the development of a strong international legal framework and impacted domestic law decisions and policies. Our work also contributed to elevating the importance of these rights within the international discourse, including by supporting the adoption of landmark resolution by the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly. But perhaps one of the most significant results of our work was the building of a global movement to promote and enable environment for the enjoyment of these rights. We now have vibrant coalition of civil society, international organizations, and government alliance. Today's conversation is the testament to that. Despite the progress made in the last decades, the reality is that the trend of closing civic space has deepened worldwide, a trend which this mandate has extensively documented. Over these 10 years, we witnessed the repression of peaceful protests across all continents. Threats to civil society actors persist, from restrictive law to criminalization, harassment, and murder. New technology have helped civil society to grow and increase their outreach, but they have also given authorities new tools to control and surveil them. Nevertheless, people around the world continue to exercise this fundamental freedom to demand a better world. Civil society organizations and social movements, many led by women, continue to secure achievements in human rights, peace, and development. Their dedication, courage, and resilience are simply extraordinary. COVID-19 has once again demonstrated this. Civil society around the world has proven to be an essential player in helping countries mitigate, adapt, and transform from this crisis. We need more dialogue and participation. People's voices and talents should be valued and encouraged, not suppressed and silenced. Today, I'm proud to celebrate with you our achievement in protecting and promoting these rights. While we have a long road ahead, I'm convinced we can continue effecting positive change in the future. COVID-19 presents an opportunity to build back a better world where participation and civic space are at the center. But unless there is a renewed commitment from the world leaders, closing civic space will become the norm around the world. I call on all governments to commit to protect these fundamental freedoms at domestic and international level. I thank you and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Special Rapporteur Voulet. Thank you for those thoughtful remarks, but more importantly, thank you for all the work that you do. We will now move on to high-level speakers. We will hear from high-level representatives from the European Union, Czechia, and Lithuania. Each speaker will present remarks for 5 minutes. A reminder that we have interpretation available. Just look at the bottom of your Zoom screen for the globe icon. We also have the Slido platform open. Our first speaker is the European Union's Special Representative for Human Rights, Mr. Eamon Gilmore. Welcome, Special Representative Gilmore. We appreciate you joining us today and we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. Ministers of the Czech Republic and Lithuania, Deputy High Commissioner, Special Rapporteur Clement Voulet, and dear guests, it is a privilege to address this high-level webinar and to join all of you in marking the 10th anniversary of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur on the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. I thank the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and the Special Rapporteur for organizing this event. While the mandate that we are marking today is turning only 10, the rights which the Special Rapporteur advances were laid out more than 70 years ago when that generation built the modern international human rights system on the ruins of the Second World War. Over the last 7 decades, freedom of assembly has been instrumental in fighting authoritarianism, discrimination, and injustice. For example, in 1989, peaceful protests brought to an end the totalitarian regimes in Europe and tore down the Iron Curtain, which divided the continent for over 40 years. More recently, in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, demonstrations in the streets of American and European cities were a stark reminder of the scourge of racism persisting in our societies. And of course, in Belarus, hundreds of thousands of people have since last August taken to the streets with a simple demand for a free and fair election. Similarly, freedom of association has given rise to vibrant civil society and has empowered people around the world. Through trade unions, it has furthered labour rights and dignity of work. And I am myself a former trade union organiser. The freedom to associate with others in all spheres of life, civil, political, economic, social, and cultural, are key for any healthy society and for the enjoyment of an array of other human rights. I want to congratulate all of the special rapporteurs, past and present, for all the work that they did since the creation of this mandate 10 years ago, and for the scope of the issues addressed. Let me reiterate the European Union's resolve to promote and defend human rights worldwide, including the rights of every person to peaceful assembly and to associate with others, online as well as offline. In doing so, we will continue employing our rich human rights toolbox, both in bilateral and multilateral relations. First, our new action plan on human rights and democracy is unequivocal in support of civil society, as well as in support of building resilient, inclusive and democratic societies worldwide. This involves preventing and acting against violations of freedom of peaceful assembly and association, including where civil society organizations are affected. The European Union is a strong advocate of effective multilateralism, with the United Nations at its core and with civil society as an indispensable stakeholder. The European Union and its member states are the world's largest donor across the board. Our European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights is the world's largest program dedicated to the promotion of human rights and democracy, 1.3 billion euros between 2014 and 2020. Substantial funding is channeled to civil society projects promoting freedom of assembly and association worldwide. And the EU has been using this instrument also to support directly the work of the Special Rapporteur. Our grant has enabled the mandate to increase the number of joint communications sent to governments and to strengthen the outreach to civil society. The European Union strongly supports the independence of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and her office. We defend an independent and effective system of special procedures. Our 27 member states fully cooperate with special rapporteurs and other human rights experts of the Human Rights Council and have issued a standing invitation to all of them. Finally, we have embedded human rights into our trade relations. Our trade agreements and our system of trade preferences for developing countries contain human rights clauses, including labor rights such as freedom of association in trade unions. The efforts I have just sketched are examples of both action past and present, and of our future commitments. Today, as we witness a backlash against freedom of assembly and association under various pretexts, it is more urgent than ever that we commit to action and that we act together to reverse the backsliding. This event and the resilience shown by those standing up for human rights bring hope for a better enjoyment of freedom of assembly and association in the decade ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Special Representative Gilmore. We appreciate your thoughtful remarks as well as all of the work that you do. We will now hear from the Foreign Minister of Czechia, Tomáš Petříček, as well as the Foreign Minister of Lithuania, Linas Antonius Linkevičius. It's particularly appropriate that these two countries have a leadership role. I should mention 30 years ago, when I was a legal advisor to the Parliament of then Czechoslovakia, the first law on the agenda was the associations law. And both countries have been leaders when it came to protecting civic space around the world. So we look forward to your remarks. Our first remarks will be from Foreign Minister Petříček. Please.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, let me start by thanking the Special Rapporteur, Clément Beaulieu, and his team for organizing this event. I'm honored to join all the participants, including my dear colleagues. I would like to also acknowledge those who are with us online from all over the world. The rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association are closely linked to important events of the Czech recent history, as mentioned. That is the 1989 Velvet Revolution and our late President Václav Havel's legacy. For over 3 decades, we can benefit from the useful role of associations, NGOs, or trade unions. Ensuring the rights to freedom of association and of peaceful assembly is a never-ending work in the Czech Republic as much as in all the other countries. Commitments related to the freedom of peaceful assembly and of association remain quite similar to those that were mentioned in the 2010 Human Rights Council resolution. The Czech Republic then submitted the resolution together with Indonesia, Lithuania, Mexico, Nigeria, and the United States. I want to thank these countries for their fantastic cross-regional cooperation, and I look forward to the participation of some of them in this event. I would like to explain why the initial commitments still provide a solid basis. In the Human Rights Council resolutions, we call upon states to respect and fully protect the rights of all individuals to assemble peacefully and associate freely. That includes, for instance, in the context of elections. We further call on states to continue to fully cooperate with the mandate, respond promptly to communications, consider favorably requests for visits, and give due consideration to the implementation of the mandate's recommendations. Czechia believes that fulfilling this commitment leads to the full realization of rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and association, which is also essential for other human rights and freedoms. It is also crucial for the Agenda 2030 and its goal 16 that goes hand in hand with our another priority, participation in public and political affairs. The catch lies in the application of these commitments in practice, however. As we are going to hear probably several times during this event, the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association have been constantly challenged since the establishment of the mandate. The Special Rapporteur calls it a decade of compounding challenges. It is marked by an increasingly restricted civic space and the problematic use of modern technologies, including internet shutdowns. Quick overview of the situations that the Special Rapporteur has addressed in the past few months, available on the website, encompass all regions and include situations such as in Belarus, Venezuela, Iran, or Hong Kong, China. We follow those situations with serious concern. Let me briefly mention Belarus. Recent protest marches, which remained largely peaceful, have been violently repressed by anti-riot police. People cannot be arrested and fined for trying to participate in public life. The authorities must release all those who are still in detention for exercising their right for peaceful assembly and expression. On top of that, we are facing a major challenge of the COVID-19 pandemic, impacting, for instance, elections. Maybe the situation in Myanmar will be also discussed during the event today. If all states would keep their commitment to the mandate as agreed in the consensus resolutions, we would have a different discussion today. However, when a government international breaks its commitment by repressing these rights or not cooperating with the mandate, it is our role to address such situations. We should be looking for ways how to build upon a consensus initiative if a country ignores requests from the Special Rapporteur. Amidst all the challenges, we sometimes forget about the work done by the Special Rapporteur. 17 thematic reports, over 600 urgent appeals, 13 country visits, 2 related important initiatives in the Human Rights Council, on civic space and on peaceful protests, cooperation with treaty bodies and a strong network of civil society activists and other stakeholders. Of course, the Special Rapporteur is not standing alone. Just a few months ago, the Human Rights Committee issued a crucial general comment number 37 on Article 21 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which deals with the freedom of peaceful assembly and of association in the 21st century. It is so important the Special Rapporteur was directly involved in the drafting. The general comment clearly stipulates that protection of the right to peaceful assembly extends to remote participation, including online assemblies, which is even more important during the pandemic. The general comment must be taken into account when exporting modern technologies used for restrictions of freedom of peaceful assembly and of association, as, for example, internet shutdowns. conclude, the commitments in the 15/21 and the subsequent resolutions remain valid. We do not have to reinvent the wheel, but that doesn't mean that our work stops here. On the contrary, while we continue the current work, the Special Rapporteur urged us to move forward towards a more vigorous and coordinated agenda to protect the rights to peaceful assembly and association across the world. For our part, we will continue to fulfill our commitments by doing our homework in the Czech Republic, but also by cooperating with the mandate and civil society on the ground. At the same time, we also need the Special Rapporteur and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights and other stakeholders, namely the civil society and trade unions, to sustain their focus on these rights in their work. Ultimately, the success of this mandate stands and falls with real positive changes on the ground. This can be best achieved if we act together on our initial commitments. After all, anniversaries are always enjoyed better in a company. Thank you, and I look forward for the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Foreign Minister Petříček. We appreciate your insightful comments. We will now turn to Foreign Minister Lekevicius. It's an honor to have you join us today, and we look forward to your remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. As one of organizers of this event, it's my honor to welcome you all this high-level webinar. 10 years ago, the Human Rights Council established the mandate of Special Rapporteur on the rights for freedom, peaceful assembly and association. And Lithuania is proud to have been part of this historic consensual decision and core group member. The important achievements, including promoting progressive standards, providing practical assistance to states, engaging with civil society, have been reached during the last decade. I would like to express our gratitude to Mr. Voulet and to the former mandate holders for their efforts to support and protect civil society and all individuals seeking to enjoy their rights. Nevertheless, we saw a decade of growing challenges to the freedom of assembly and association, such as increasing trend of restrictions. COVID-19, some processes in the digital space. Autocrats, dictators, human rights abusers attack freedom of association and assembly viciously. Freedom of peaceful assembly and of association is one of the enabling freedoms, which is in many cases becomes a primary target. If it's not secured, the realization of other rights becomes more difficult. Limitations across the world, such as the adoption of national security laws, counterterrorism in the interests of public order, criminalization of peaceful protests, excessive use of force to repress peaceful protests are particularly alarming. This tendency is evident in the world, also in Lithuania's neighborhood. We are concerned about the brutal manifestation of mass violence by security forces in Belarus, imprisonment of peaceful demonstrators, growing repressions of the political opposition and of civil society. I applaud the peaceful protesters, those in Belarus for courageously claiming their rights for the peaceful demonstrations. We also witnessed similar worrisome situation in Russia, where peaceful expression of the citizens' rights are criminalized, and the authorities use all kinds of tools against them: financial sanctions, administrative sanctions, criminal prosecution, physical repressions, and even poisoning, as we all know. These violations should not remain unaddressed. International community should not shy away from principled action and encourage setting up international investigations on human rights violations and bringing perpetrators to justice. COVID pandemic is yet another challenge to our reality, and even democratic countries fully respecting freedom of peaceful assembly and association are forced to restrict it. As rightly pointed out by Special Rapporteur himself, the effectiveness of measures to defeat pandemic depends on ability to secure people's participation and trust. We call on governments to collaborate with civil society in order to counter the negative effects of the pandemic. We are living in the digital age where, besides the numerous opportunities to advance democracy, there are plenty of risks and challenges that must be aware of. Misuse of digital technology to silence, surveil, and harass political opposition, human rights defenders, activists, and protesters, especially ahead of critical democratic moments, such as elections, has become more evident. It should become our priority to advocate for the new opportunities and spaces online instead of restricting them. Dear colleagues, our future and commitments are clear. We should fight back against all undue restrictions to the freedom of association and assembly, including striking the right balance on civic space and COVID pandemic responses. Support for democratic reforms, rule of law, vibrant civil societies, and that will remain unchanged. Currently, Lithuania is running for a seat on the Human Rights Council for the period of 2022-24, and if elected, we will do our part in promoting safety of journalists, protection of human rights defenders, as well as freedoms of expression, assembly, and association. Lithuania will also seek to ensure a greater inclusion of civil society in Council's work and stronger mandates of special procedures. Lithuania will also continue supporting free people of many states that peacefully and openly seek enjoyment of their rights and better future for their societies. In international fora, we will further demonstrate our active engagement in strengthening the United Nations human rights system, as well as enhancing multilateralism. Let me once again to wish Special Rapporteur all the success in implementing his challenging and ambitious tasks. In addition, I'd like to wish us all to remain vigilant, not to tolerate even small violations, as in some time they tend to become major problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Foreign Minister Levicius. We appreciate your remarks in the leadership of Lithuania, not only in this event, but also on association and assembly issues around the world. We appreciate it. We will now expand the discussion. The foreign ministers have kindly agreed to stay online, and we'll also welcome the Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, Nada Al-Nashif. In addition, for a civil society perspective, we're joined by Hina Jalani. She's well known to many of you, but she's an advocate in the Supreme Court of Pakistan and a member of the Elders, a group of independent global leaders working for peace and human rights. First, Deputy High Commissioner Al-Nashif, we'd welcome your reflections on what you've heard before, and what question would you like to pose to the Foreign Minister? Deputy High Commissioner, are you there?
Yes, I'm sorry. I think we're taking just a little bit of time. I got logged off accidentally, but I'm back online.
That happens. We're used to that. Take your time.
Thank you.
You're ready for your reflections and any comments or questions you'd like to raise for the Foreign Minister's attention. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Excellencies, dear friends and guests. Let me also wish a happy 10-year anniversary to the mandate and thank the Special Rapporteur for organizing this webinar to commemorate this important milestone. Let me add my voice also to congratulate Clement's efforts, but also those of his predecessors who have brought the mandate to where it is today, and for the very important achievements. I think that we can now celebrate 10 years, so many country visits, and hundreds of path-breaking recommendations later. And I'd like to say, as the Special Rapporteur has pointed out many times, and Foreign Minister Linkevicius has just mentioned, the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and association are not only rights in themselves, but are also enabling rights, obviously, that allow individuals and groups to exercise other human rights and allow people to express their concerns and ideas for change. It is an expression of their right to participate in public affairs. Again, at this time, these rights deserve heightened attention and protection, not just because of the backsliding that Special Representative Gilmore mentioned, but especially during crises, including political turmoil or following the declaration of states of emergencies. And we have witnessed social protests this year, was also mentioned, from Hong Kong and Thailand across to many parts of South America. Protests have even continued throughout the COVID pandemic when facing and resisting the threat of contagion. Millions of protesters across all regions of the world have come out onto the streets. Both ministers have mentioned the challenges of restrictions on the right to freedom of peaceful assembly during the pandemic. And while there is no doubt that when people assemble and express themselves peacefully, they are fully protected by human rights law, we recognize that these rights are not absolute, and there are situations, strict conditions, where they can be limited. The burden is on states, however, to show that restrictions are necessary, that these restrictions are proportionate, and they do not discriminate, instead serving a purpose that will not weaken the right itself. Even in times of crisis, states must facilitate peaceful assembly. And so I apologize for the lack of video, I think, until now, but we're going to work on it. But in the meantime, let me ask their excellencies a question. I'd like to hear your ideas, excellencies, on what states can do to support other states so that despite emergency measures adopted in response to the pandemic, they can continue to uphold the rights to freedom of assembly and association. And what role for international oversight mechanisms and the UN system? But any of your thoughts on that, including some best practices from your own experiences. Thank you, I'll stop there.
Thank you, Deputy High Commissioner. Foreign Minister Petricek, would you wish to contribute on this issue? And then I'll turn to Foreign Minister Linkevicius.
Thank you very much for this important question. I fully agree that there are situations when we can calibrate some restrictions that are in conflict with freedom of association and freedom of assembly. Unfortunately, this is the case of the pandemic right now, but I fully subscribe to what was said. These measures needs to be proportionate, needs to be time limited, and needs to really be adequate to the situation that is now. At the same time, I think that exactly in these situations of crisis, it is necessary to demonstrate that while we promote freedom of assembly and association all across the world, we need to ensure that we allow meaningful participation at home. I would like to stress that sometimes it requires creativity. We have managed to hold elections during the second wave of the pandemic, despite difficult circumstances. Actually, last month, we successfully organized nationwide regional elections that, for instance, required passing a special law enabling drive-through voting in order to allow also people who are in quarantine to participate. At the same time, I think this is also a situation when a dialogue with civil society is even more important than in a normal time. And here we need to see what is the potential of new technologies to increase the participation of public in decision-making, not only of government, but at all levels. On the second part of the question, when it comes to oversight mechanisms, as was pointed out, the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association can be limited in some situations. During the spring outbreak of the pandemic, my ministry has run several checks of our emergency state before fully implementing it. There have been long discussions and some decisions were considered. And I think this is exactly a task for every country to do it. And here I think it is also responsibility of international community to oversee whether the measures adopted are taken with full consideration of what I mentioned, proportionality and necessity. Thank you.
Foreign Minister Linkevicius, please.
I agree with what Thomas said, but just in some peculiarities of this phenomena. I believe when we are talking about freedom of assembly, demonstrations, demands to express our so to say wishes, our views, especially in pandemics, it's quite tricky because on one hand you have to follow restrictions, and that's obvious. But on the other hand, we have to understand that those regimes who are abusing the people, they're using this obstacle as an excuse and maybe a hope to survive. And this is exactly happening in Belarus, for instance, where really people, they more than 3 months protesting, they're trying to demand very simple things, just the freedom to choose and try to have transparent and democratic elections. So demanding not too much, looks like decent dialogue, and they're being abused, tortured, and raped even, and this is happening as we speak. So this is not about pandemics, it's about something else. And we, how to help countries, first of all, we have to preserve the principled position ourselves. First of all, expressing and defining very clear standards, respecting restrictions, but on the other hand, we have to demand that the rights of people to assembly and to express their views must be defended, regardless where they are. And when we are talking abstractly, it's one thing, but when we're talking applying the concrete events as we speak again, it's another story, and it's a very vivid illustration. So that's very important. When it comes to technical issues, I agree, we have to share best practices, and all the time we can learn from these challenges and learn new methods to communicate, to associate, to network, and with regard to elections, by the way, also to how to make them in a safe way, but they have to take place. This is also possible to do, and we went through that. So we really, by sharing best practices, we really can achieve a lot in helping each other, and the countries can be helped. But again, I would come back to this, my first point, because it's more sensitive, more up-to-date, more important. We must really stand very firm on defending this basic right of people, and not to allow others, especially dictators, to use it as an excuse to close, to prevent, to stop from exercising elementary rights of the people. And this is the best way to support other countries.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to Hina Jelani and ask for your reflections. We've heard about the rise of all these emergency measures. According to our ICNO COVID-19 Civic Freedom Tracker, we find 94 countries with emergency measures. And as we just heard from Foreign Minister Linkevicius, some are using the emergency measures as a pretext to restrict civic space. It's very easy to assemble emergency measures, very difficult to deconstruct them. What are your reflections on what we need the international community to do to address these issues around emergency measures? And are there other challenges you'd like to bring to the attention of the foreign ministers?
Thank you very much, Douglas. Excellencies, Deputy High Commissioner, the Special Rapporteur, and my friend Clement, ladies and gentlemen, I think this is a very timely held webinar, and on a topic which I think is becoming more and more important, both at the national level and for the international community to think over and to find the right responses at the right time before we really kind of descend into chaos. I would like to begin, Douglas, by saying that freedom of association and assembly and the right to peaceful protest are closely related. And we should never forget the element of the freedom of assembly, which is the important element, and that is of peaceful protest. The ability to promote human rights through collective action is the core purpose of these rights. And it is for this reason that the 1998 UN Declaration on Human Rights Defenders reaffirms the right of everyone individually and in association with others to meet or assemble peacefully and to form, join, and participate in non-governmental organizations. These freedoms are at the heart of an active civil society and a functioning democracy. It involves the right of individuals to interact and organize among themselves to collectively express, promote, pursue, and defend common interests. I think in the context of the question that you have asked me, look at the situation that we face today. The COVID pandemic has in many ways exposed weaknesses in our systems globally that have deprived people of the means to survive in a civil emergency of the kind that we are experiencing now. Rising poverty, inequality, diminishing opportunities are now leading to protest, and the response of the state is, I'm afraid, it falls far below what we expect the principles that have already been, and the norms that have been developed to allow. I think the Deputy High Commissioner very correctly pointed out that these rights are not absolute, but at the same time, we must remember that they may not be absolute, but that ability to restrain and limit these rights cannot justify governments going much beyond the scope of what the international law allows in terms of limitations. We have seen civic space shrinking, and the kind of restraints that are being placed on the freedom of association have been of concern to people like me and people like Clement for a long time. But now these are becoming of serious concern, because everywhere in the world we see NGOs being targeted, mostly because they want to restrict their ability to expose human rights violations and abuse. At the same time, I think I also fear that the freedom of assembly in particular is something we need to keep our eyes on. I think we have seen from the example of the United States, from Thailand, from Hong Kong, that policing of demonstrations has become much more violent, and security is being used more and more as a pretext for adopting harsher measures and new legislation to restrain the freedom of assembly. And such freedom, even peaceful assemblies, are now being criminalized in many ways. So this should be a cause of concern. In my time, I have seen totally peaceful assemblies turn into riots because of the response of the state. In my part of the world, denial or deprivation of economic, social, and cultural rights has led to protest, and the response of the government and law enforcement agencies have further violated civil and political rights of the demonstrators. So this has become an example where, for one thing, we see the interdependence of these rights, but on the other, we see that there is no consciousness of how material deprivations can, in many ways, lead to real political tensions between the citizen and the state.
Thank you for those thoughtful remarks. Deputy High Commissioner Alneshev, you've now heard responses to the question that you asked. I would welcome your reflections, as well as sort of moving beyond the identification of the problem, but your ideas on what concretely you think we need to do as a community, whether we work for international organizations, foreign ministries, or civil society, to help safeguard civic space over the coming months and years.
Thank you. Thanks very much for the question and for the inputs. And I think following on from Hina's always eloquent insights. I think the main issue is, yes, it is a slippery slope, clearly, and once we start on this thing, the repression, the increased restrictions on the work of journalists, human rights defenders, women, more and more under these. We mentioned technologies, although they've helped us to grow, but there is an oppressive side. Again, as Hina was saying, these have often been excuses to curtail freedoms, and I think the ministers have also spoken to this. So, I mean, in terms of what we can do, and I think it was great to have the ministers speak to the need for innovative thinking, of learning from experiences, from sharing. I think we think that there should always be more dialogue. There should be very concrete opportunities for constructive exchange, whether it is with sub-communities of environment, instead of discreditation, instead of accusations, instead of criminalization, which is quite often we see. We've done a lot of work on the protest movements, and we have really understood the importance to understand context. Very important to look at accountability. And how accountability structures are set up in societies, and to look at root causes. When disenfranchisement happens, again, it's usually not an overnight thing. It's usually vulnerable communities which have been pushed to the extreme, whatever. And we have been trying to help member states understand and respond to grievances of protesters in this very specific case. And the Secretary General, of course, has issued a call to action for human rights. So understanding how engagement, community participation is really going to help to break some of those frustrations and bring us a little bit closer to the ideal in terms of protection. And that would have been, I'm not sure we have time for a second question, but I think this thing of how, yeah, just how, again, the ministers who have obviously been dealing with these issues, but how we can effectively ensure participation in decision making. That was an interesting example of changing laws to allow people in quarantine to vote. The right to vote is critical, of course, but also we've been talking, for example, about now the dissemination of the vaccine, assuming we find it, that it's a vaccine which is affordable, can be made equally available to all communities. But how are we going to engage communities in understanding the pushback on vaccines, this vaccine nationalism issues, but also information sharing and the right to science, and how do we engage communities in ownership of the decisions that are being made? And I'll stop there.
Thank you. If you don't mind, this time I'll reverse the order and I'll give Hina the first word, if you'd like, about participation of communities in responding to the Deputy High Commissioner's thoughtful question. And then if it's okay, I'll turn to the foreign ministers. Hina, would you like to contribute on this?
Yes, Doug, I think it was already said in the beginning of this session that despite increasing restraints, people are continuing to exercise the freedom of association and of assembly. Communities are reacting to clamp down on their ability to make their voices heard, because it is one of the foremost rights of a citizen to participate in in governance of their own state. And what better way of doing this than being able to voice their concerns by collective action, such as peaceful assemblies. And I think it's best that we already have the standards. I don't see any need for new standards to be developed, but certainly mechanisms of accountability have to be better ordered, both at the international level and in our national situations as well. We have judiciaries that are not independent, are unable to protect communities against violation of the right to freedom of assembly or freedom of association, and we are seeing human rights organizations, civil society organizations targeted everywhere, and the work of the defense of human rights being criminalized every day. So I do believe that institutions of democracy have to understand that while human rights is the pathway to democracy, peace, and freedom, these institutions of democracy of justice have also to understand that human rights defenders have to be protected if human rights are to be promoted and protected.
Thank you. I'll now turn to Foreign Minister Linkevicius, and I'll give the final word of this segment to Foreign Minister Petrychek. But first,
thanks. Shortly, I'd like to thank all colleagues for expressing their views. And it looks like, indeed, like Madam Gilani told, that pandemics disclosed our weaknesses. It's always the case when some challenge is around. It's like stress test to the organism, to the mechanism, to the building, to the organization, and disclosing gaps. So this is really exactly the case. It's also clear that all these threats are universal, regardless the location. And when rights are criminalized by authorities, by regimes, it's regardless of where it is. So we really have to share the best practices how to fight with that. The best way to, in addition to what was said, would be to focus on the most vulnerable maybe segments. And again, it's since we're talking about human rights in general, because freedom of assembly is human rights, part of that. So we have to focus on those most vulnerable segments. And I would single out journalists, for instance, freedom of journalists. Also, I would focus on women and children, protect them in the crisis especially, and to follow all these resolutions we passed through United Nations mechanisms and what could be the follow-up in the respective organizations we are doing, what could be the tangible follow-up, not just statements and yet another, so to say, statement, but just to do what we can do jointly. And that's exactly the case. So it's, in short, it's good that we, despite of all these challenges, can meet, talk, share. I would wish to continue in the same spirit, and grateful very much to the colleagues for co-organizers of this discussion, and looking forward for the continuation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're very grateful to you as well. Foreign Minister Petrychek.
Thank you very much for this inspiring discussion. I would like to conclude by stressing that we should use the experience from this crisis to further advance the agenda when it comes to participation and when it comes to freedom of association and of assembly. I see in this crisis that for example, the access to information is very important to enable citizens to participate in decision-making processes and to formulate their demands. The crisis also showed, and here I would like to thank Madam Gilani for her comment, that there are segments of our societies that are currently vulnerable because of a lack of skills necessary, for example, for digital participation, that they don't have the tools and skills to be active when as part of the decision making, and the opportunities for participation is in digital sphere. Here we need to target and address this challenge by improving the access to digital knowledge to these segments of our societies. And last but not least, I think that we need to allow for more participation in formulation of the policies that react to COVID-19. It is not only about elections. I think that the freedom we are asking for everybody is that the voice is heard not only once in 4 years.
Thank you. We appreciate your participation in this segment. I think there are a number of interesting takeaways. First, we heard about how COVID has exposed underlying conditions, and whether it be in Belarus or otherwise, this movement towards autocracy, and this question about how do we help protect and safeguard civic space, democracy, and human rights during the COVID era. To a very important point about participation and how to help safeguard those who are marginalized by power, as well as an important issue around the digital divide as we move increasingly online. Finally, The initiatives that we're hearing from the international community, we heard about several today. The OECD also has some interesting initiatives. The DAC has a promising process as well. There's much that's underway, but of course, much more that needs to be done. So thank you all for participating. We will have a second conversation later on, but what we're going to do now is have a couple of video remarks. We'll hear a video message from the Irish Foreign Minister Coveney, followed by a message from ILO Deputy Director General Newton. We will also ask you to pay attention to Slido. We'll put up a poll that you'll be asked to respond to, and you'll also see some of the questions that other audience members have been raising. But while you're looking at Slido, I kindly ask Flora to show the videos, starting with the Irish Foreign Minister, and we thank again the foreign ministers from the Czech Republic and Lithuania. Flora, over to you.
Good afternoon, distinguished panelists and participants. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to speak with you today to mark the 10th anniversary of this very important human rights mandate on freedoms of peaceful association and assembly. Let me begin by paying tribute to our Special Rapporteur, Mr. Valle, as well as both of his predecessors for the tireless work that they've undertaken. Simply put, the rights of individuals to peaceful assembly and association are critical to the full enjoyment of civil and political rights, as well as economic, social, and cultural rights as well. At any time, underlying the value of these freedoms would be important, but at this particular moment, as the global community strives to respond to and recover from the COVID crisis, they're more important than ever. Regrettably, in every geographical region, we see unacceptable pressures exerted to limit these freedoms, both online and offline. As you will be aware, Ireland has long been a proud champion of civic space, amplifying the voices of civic society, that is to say, the lived experience of our individuals, as a priority for us at home and on an international stage. It will be a central feature of how we approach our tenure as a temporary member of the UN Security Council. We don't do this just because it's the right thing to do, although it is, but because we believe that this approach leads to better policy formulation. In February this year, I had the honour of addressing the Human Rights Council. Then I quoted Malala, the champion of girls' education, who commented that if people were silent, nothing would change. As governments, we must recognise the unique contribution that citizens can make as accelerators of change and progress. Time and time again, we have witnessed the powerful transformation that peaceful protests and civic society movements can bring. In the case of my own country, both in terms of a peace process and social change, the road that we have travelled has been influenced by the contributions that people have made to the national debate. And the basic truth is that as governments, as an international community, if we are to successfully chart a sustainable course through the current global crisis, we must listen to our citizens and we must support a safe and enabled environment for people to enjoy those fundamental freedoms. For this reason, Ireland and our EU partners wholeheartedly endorse the UN Secretary-General's call to action on human rights, with its strong emphasis on public participation and civic space. And we commend High Commissioner Bachelet and her team and the leadership that they have shown in consistently demonstrating the fundamental value of a vibrant, diverse civic society. Central also to the defence of these rights is, of course, the role of the UN Special Rapporteurs and in particular, the mandate that we're celebrating here today. Once again, I thank Mr. Valle and his predecessors for their work. We look forward to continuing our support for your efforts. In 10 years, much has been achieved. So notwithstanding the challenges, let's look forward to the decade ahead with optimism and courage. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear from the ILO Deputy Director General, Martha Newton, who submitted a video. Flora, take it away.
It is an honor for me to represent the ILO today on this important occasion to celebrate the special mandate holder on freedom of peaceful assembly and association. It's a privilege to come together, if even only virtually, with such high-level government representation, which demonstrates the firm commitment made to these fundamental and democratic rights. 10 years ago, the Human Rights Council resoundingly underlined the importance of these fundamental rights. The resolution, recalling the inseparable nature of the rights of all persons to assemble peacefully and associate freely, emphasizes that these rights are not limited to the political sphere, but call equally for their protection in the world of work. While the resolution has fully recognized the ILO's critical mandate, role, and expertise, as well as its specialized supervisory mechanisms and procedures with respect to employers' and workers' freedom of association, the synergies developed between our two agencies over the last decade have borne fruit through coherent messaging and a common call to action. Over the last 10 years, the Special Rapporteur has regularly issued reports on the state of respect for these fundamental rights in a variety of sectors and from a number of perspectives. An example of this is the 2016 report on the exercise and enjoyment of rights in the workplace. And it's just one of the many reports that have been important for elevating the place of freedom of association in the labor sphere to the international human rights agenda. A concrete example of the United Nations acting as one. The ILO is also deeply appreciative of the efforts made by the special rapporteurs to include areas emanating from the ILO supervisory mechanisms among the matters raised in their country visits. While the resolution for the creation of the mandate holder is clear that duplication is to be avoided, these actions have been highly effective in garnering greater consideration for and support to the recommendations of the ILO supervisory bodies. Similarly, the special rapporteurs have recalled the importance of ratifying the relevant fundamental ILO conventions in order to ensure even greater policy coherence. The value of collaboration between our distinct mandates was underlined when the special rapporteur joined the high-level event on freedom of association and collective bargaining during the ILO centenary celebration. As today's event clearly demonstrates, the pandemic has provided new challenges to our respective mandates. We thank the Special Rapporteur's recent statement urging governments to ensure that their responses to the COVID-19 threat do not impede exercise of essential freedoms. Maintaining our vigilance in key areas is more critical than ever, as they are the cornerstones to ensuring inclusive and participatory dialogue for efficiently building back better. Across our mandates, we're united in our conviction that human rights must be placed front and center in government policies responding to the pandemic and beyond, with freedom of association as a critical part of any sustainable recovery. The ILO welcomes the opportunities provided by the special mandate holder to join our efforts to reach policymakers around the world so that freedom and peaceful assembly and association are fully guaranteed. We in the ILO look forward to identifying further areas for coordinated action. And I'm sure that today's event will continue to focus attention to promote full respect for these critical guarantees and wish the Special Rapporteur great success in his continued work on these important tasks. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear from state representatives from Mexico, Switzerland, and Maldives, each of whom have supported the mandate. First, we'll hear from the permanent representative of Mexico to the UN in Geneva, Ambassador Socorro Flores Liera. Madam Ambassador, we look forward to your remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and good afternoon from Geneva. It is a pleasure for me to join such a distinguished group of panelists, including the foreign ministers of the Czech Republic and Lithuania, the EU Special Representative for Human Rights, the UN Deputy High Commissioner for Human Rights, and of course, the Special Rapporteur on the Rights to Freedom of Peaceful Assembly and Association, Mr. Clement Bull. 10 years ago, Mexico, together with the Czech Republic, Lithuania, and other partners, started the journey that led to the creation of the mandate of the Special Rapporteur. We were convinced at that time that creating this mandate at the Human Rights Council was the right thing to do, and now, 10 years after, we have reaffirmed our conviction as well as the need to continue promoting and defending freedom of peaceful assembly and association everywhere. The right of every citizen to participate in assemblies and protests is fundamental for the well-being of our democracies. Dissent is a natural condition of all societies, and the ability to express that dissent through organized assemblies and associations contributes to transparency, social justice, and sustainable development. The Special Rapporteur and his two predecessors have greatly contributed to uphold this right through their country visits, communications to governments, and analysis of legal frameworks. Mexico will continue to uphold the ability of the Special Rapporteur to monitor and defend this right at a time where the world faces great challenges, such as the recovery from the pandemic and climate change. The mandate has also identified challenges that individuals, and in particular civil society, face in the exercise of the right to freedom of assembly and association, such as limitations that are imposed with the intention to maintain national security, public order, and fight terrorism. These measures sometimes lead to the criminalization of peaceful protest, to the use of indiscriminate and excessive use of force to counter or repress protest, or to censorship and excessive surveillance of the digital space. As a member of the core group that regularly presents the resolution on freedom of peaceful assembly and association at the Human Rights Council, Mexico will make all efforts to maintain the independence of the mandate and its ability to monitor and highlight challenges that states are facing. We have the deep belief that enhancing the exercise of the right to freedom of assembly and association can help to address other global challenges, such as poverty and inequality, violent extremism, and will reinforce the dynamism of democracies around the world. As a strong supporter of gender equality, Mexico will also draw attention to the specific challenges that women and girls face in the exercise of the right to freedom of assembly as association, and to how the full exercise of this right, free from coercion and violence, contribute to substantive gender equality. Mexico remains ready to work with the Czech Republic, Lithuania, and other partners in order to make sure that the mandate of the Special Rapporteur will have another 10 years and to be successful and constructive work. Dear Special Rapporteur, on behalf of the government of Mexico, please accept our congratulations in this anniversary. We remain ready to support your work in any way we can. Thank you very much, and back to you, Mr. Rutsen.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador. We appreciate your support for the mandate. We will now hear from the Deputy Permanent Representative of Switzerland, Ambassador Felix Bauman. Please, sir, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. First of all, let me express my pleasure to participate in this event this afternoon and to underscore Switzerland's commitment to human rights and fundamental freedoms overall, and to peaceful assembly and association in particular. Along with freedom of opinion and expression, peaceful assembly and association constitute the foundation of our democratic societies. They are indispensable to ensure representation, to express grievances, and to hold governments accountable. They're also necessary to contribute to social change. They are rights entitled to everyone, including children. Every day we are reminded of the importance of these rights and their contribution to the objective of just, peaceful, and inclusive societies. We have worked together with the mandate of the Special Rapporteurs for 10 years now to advance the thematic through the lens of peaceful protests. Switzerland introduced this initiative at the Human Rights Council for the first time in 2011, and we have continued since with the initiative with Costa Rica by our side. The latest resolution on the promotion and protection of human rights in the context of peaceful protests, adopted at the June session this year, focused specifically on the impact, positive and negative, of new technologies, as well as on emergency measures taken in the context of COVID-19. The resolution also provides for a panel discussion at the September 2021 session and a report due in June 2022, both of which the Special Rapporteur will play a leading role. We also would like to highlight some of the related work undertaken over the past years. The joint report of the Special Rapporteurs on freedom of assembly and association and on summary executions, short of guidelines, paved the way for the articulation of 10 principles for the proper management of assemblies. We also supported the joint work of UNODC and the OHCHR that led to the 2017 resource book on the use of force and firearms in law enforcement. We have also supported the work of an expert working group led by the Geneva Academy and Christoph Heinz that led to the development and the publication of the UN Human Rights Guidance on less lethal weapons in law enforcement in October of last year. We also welcome the recent adoption of the Human Rights Committee of its General Comment 37 on Article 21 of the ICCPR. We firmly believe that all this accumulated work provides states with useful and necessary tools to comply with their international human rights obligations and commitments in this field. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by assuring you of Switzerland's continued engagement on this issue. We will continue to challenge the Human Rights Council on issues related to human rights in the context of peaceful protests, to ensure that the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly, of association, and of expression are duly reflected in the work of human rights fora, to formulate appropriate recommendations during the UPR, and to pursue our engagement to protect those that fight for their rights and the rights of others. I thank you for your attention.
And we thank you, Ambassador Bauman, for your thoughtful remarks. We're now going to turn to a discussion among Special Rapporteur Voulet, Special Representative Gilmore. We'll bring in Ms. Tushmanina, if you could turn on your video, please, Ms. Samoya, and Ms. Jelani. And we want to talk a little bit now about the future of the mandate and what will be happening in civic space. I will turn to you in a moment as you collect your thoughts, but we'll go to a video first of the Ambassador of Maldives. But while we're showing that video, I'd ask Ms. Tushmanina to think about what you'd say if I asked you the following question. What would be the one key challenge that you'd want to prioritize for this group? And similarly, for Claudia Samayoa, if I could ask you the same question. If there's one key challenge you'd like the mandate to be focusing on over the next few years, what would it be? Think about your response. We'll show the video, and when we come back, I'll turn to you two first and then go to the entire panel for your reflections. So Flora, if you could show the video, and we'll come back for the response, please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Government of Maldives, it gives me great pleasure to address this event organized to mark the 10th anniversary of the mandate of the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association. We recognize the importance of the rights to peaceful assembly and association to the full enjoyment of civil and political rights and economic, social, and cultural rights. It is important to note that over the course of the last 10 years, the mandate has guided and contributed to many achievements in the protection of the rights of freedom of assembly and association globally. We would also like to highlight the active role undertaken by the Special Rapporteur to guide all stakeholders in the context of the current COVID-19 pandemic, and reminding states of the necessity to ensure that human rights obligations are not compromised as we respond to these unprecedented challenges. Maldives, as a member of the core group on the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and association, we look forward to working closely with the Special Rapporteur in the future, especially as he focuses on gender, youth, and climate change within his mandate. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the Constitution of the Republic of Maldives explicitly recognizes and guarantees the right to freedom of expression, association, and assembly. The Government of Maldives understands the true value of these fundamental freedoms in enhancing the rule of law, promoting institutional accountability, and empowering our citizens. In 2018, the current government repealed the Defamation Act to increase the scope for peaceful assembly, political participation, and freedom of expression. The government has already submitted to the Parliament an association bill, and we are in the process of formulating a new freedom of expression bill and a freedom of press bill to further broaden these fundamental freedoms and civic engagement. In conclusion, the Maldives would like to reaffirm our unwavering commitment to promote and uphold the rights to freedom of expression, association, and assembly as enshrined in our Constitution. These values form an indelible part of our democratic culture and development vision. I thank you.
Thank you. So giving you a couple of moments of reflection, if I could turn to you first, Mireille, what would be the key challenge you would identify? You're on mute, Mireille.
I apologize for that. Thank you so much, Doug, for the question, and congratulations again for this milestone, Special Rapporteur. Well, reflecting on the 10 years, I will say gender-based violence is suffocating women's movement. The use of excessive police brutality during protest, arbitrary arrest, and the misuse of judicial power, and the level of intimidation against assembly had by women have continued to bring global restrictions to the right of association and peaceful assembly, as well as shrinking space. So for me, gender-based violence should be one of the major focus for the next decade.
Thank you. I want to come back to that. That's really important. I want to give Claudia your chance to identify a key issue, and then I'm going to open up to the panel to reflect on both of the challenges that have been identified. So Claudia, please.
So first, thank you, and this very good webinar, and congratulations to the mandate and the mandate holder, Mr. Clement Boulet. I would like to focus on, we all recognize that there's this clampdown on civil space and that dictatorship of intolerant governments are growing around. We also recognize that COVID has placed a closure for spaces. So where is the space we are all going and flocking to? Cyberspace. So the cyberspace or digital sphere as a natural place for association and a peaceful demonstration or even protest is the new place where we can see how women's rights are being clamped down, how women are more vulnerable, also how children can find spaces to press there. But it's also the law of the jungle. It's very slightly regulated, and we need to find out how to protect that space for a clampdown, like we are seeing in governments like Nicaragua, Venezuela, and what we saw also in some Arab, North African countries when they clamped down in Arab Spring.
Thank you for raising those two challenges, and we'll now have a discussion. I'd also encourage members of the audience to contribute ideas. They can be ways to improve the mandate. It might be questions through Slido. We will get to those after these two questions, but I'd now like to open it up to the panel. I'll then come back to Mireille and Claudia for additional thoughts. But who'd like to contribute first on the issue of gender-based violence? Clement, for example, I know that you wrote a report on that. Would you like to reflect on Mireille's point?
Yes, thank you very much, Doug. Thank you, Mireille, for also asking this question. I think it's an important question, which I think also I'm happy to see also that you identify this as one of the challenge or one of the future work that the mandate should focus on. Our recent reports on women and girl enjoyment of freedom of association, peaceful assembly show also that our commitments, and it also shows also that this is very relevant because through the consultation that we had recently, we identified this as one of many things. While women movements around the world have contributed a lot in terms of democracy, in terms of revolution, today, if you look at around the world, most of the revolution are led by women movements. And you can see also during this COVID time, how women movements are able also to sacrifice, to put their time, to save their community, to work around the community. We are still seeing a lot of challenges and a lot of repression of those movements. And we saw from the Sudan, from actually in Belarus, and the minister also mentioned that some women movements are also under heavily attack. And not only that the police brutality, but we have also non-state actors that also are using different methods, harassment, rape, to dissuade women to participate. And our report shows also the importance of state to take measures to save this movement. Because not only these movements are important for our democracy, but it's important also to ensure that we are able to fight against inequality, we are able to fight against poverty, because the SDG, the agenda, 2030 agenda, is clear in terms of how it's important to ensure that no one is left behind. And we know that women movements are the movement that are more effective around the communities. And for me, it's important to save this, to save those movements, to protect those movements, but also at the same time also to ensure that those movements are well funded. Because one thing that we are also seeing is those community-based women-led movements are not funded. Even they can hardly sometimes fulfill donor requirements. That's why in this report, I'm also calling donor communities, European Union and other people, to ensure also that those movements that are working to save our community, to promote democracy, women-led movement in particular, can also have access to this funding, but long-term funding, not just funding for specific projects, because their vision and their work is important for the whole community. I think I will stop there.
Thank you. And maybe I could also ask you, Jelani, and Special Representative Gilmore, if you'd like to contribute on this particular question.
Can I just add to what Claudia said? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
You hear me?
Yes.
All right. Claudia just said that we are all moving into cyberspace because that's where we find more opportunity of voicing our concerns. Let me say, for me, one of the biggest challenges is how to make that cyberspace safe for women. The kind of sexual harassment that I have reports about and the kind of cases that I'm currently doing of women who have suffered from cyber crimes. I think it's important that we make sure that we are on the pathway to creating legislation and mechanisms that are able to hold incidents of this kind accountable, and that there is no impunity for sexual harassment in the cyberspace. That's one thing. The other thing I think Clement has already mentioned, but I just want to add another dimension to this. When you speak about women's participation in public protest, for instance, and the role of non-state actors, I think that role is necessarily a part of the traditional role that women are ascribed in certain societies, and they are denied any presence in the public domain. So just the fact that they've taken collective action in the public domain makes them vulnerable and exposed to all kinds of risks by religious leaders, or social leaders, and even their own families.
Special Representative Gilmore, would you like to contribute on this topic?
Yes, indeed. I think if we are celebrating the 10th anniversary of the mandate, I think we also look forward to what the next 10 years will look like. And I think that these two topics that have been raised, I think, are going to be the topics of the next 10 years and the challenges of the next 10 years and probably shorter. And I also think that they're interlinked. The European Union recently adopted a gender equality strategy for the European Union itself, and is currently working on a gender action plan for our actions in the world. And they are aimed respectively at a gender equal Europe and a gender equal world. And they embrace also issues such as gender-based violence, which we have seen increasing, and which I come across regularly when I talk, for example, to women human rights defenders. They, of course, talk to me about the physical threats and physical violence that they are subjected to, but increasingly they are talking about the violence that they are subjected to online and the way in which authoritarian regimes in particular are using online platforms to intimidate women, to stop them from being involved in various activities, and from freedom of assembly and association. Secondly, I would say that if we are looking at the digital space, this is increasingly where the freedom of assembly and the freedom of association is being exercised. And I think that if anything, the pandemic has probably accelerated that process. If you look, for example, at what has taken place in the nature of work during the course of the pandemic, the degree to which large numbers of people are working at home, and the degree to which people are increasingly working online. If you look at that then and transfer that to the political space, one of the interesting reports that I saw arising from the recent US election, where the online activity and online participation in the election was looked at, was that there were 700,000 calls for violence against political opponents. And that was on just one platform. So increasingly, the threat to freedom of assembly and association is being exercised online. We have come through, I think, what one might call the kind of the Wild West of the digital era. And one of the things that the European Union is now conscious of doing is of providing leadership to bring that Wild West under some control. The GDPR regulations, the code of conduct that we have negotiated and agreed with various platforms, the Digital Services Act that we are working on, and the President von der Leyen spoke recently about this, of talking about what's illegal offline should also be illegal online, applying the principles that we are talking about, including principles of freedom of assembly, freedom of association, applying them also to the digital age and to the online platform. And I think that is probably going to be where a lot of our agenda in this area is going to be over the course of the next number of years.
Thank you for those thoughtful remarks. Mireille, I want to bring you back into the conversation. I'll turn to Claudia as well. So you've now heard some responses on the issue that you raised around gender-based violence. We've also begun to talk about some of the digital issues that Claudia raised. What reflections do you have? How do you think the mandate in the international community can be most helpful looking forward, going beyond sort of the problem description, but maybe some things that can actually have impact?
Thank you so much, Doug. Echoing what Ina had previously mentioned on accountability, I mean, there is a dire need for strong accountability mechanism. I mean, when it comes to protection for the women's movement, I mean, we can never predict what possible threats can arise. You know, now we have the COVID-19 pandemic, uptake of violence during elections. There are more elections coming up for example, on the African continent. We are still under a patriarchy system designed to further marginalize women's access to their right. So a strong accountability mechanism will allow women's rights defenders to strengthen their voices and take back the power against not only the perpetrators, but moving forward. And the reality is that the COVID pandemic has already set the tone for the next decade. You know, human interactions, our environment, you know, the use of technology, as Claudia has mentioned. I mean, these trends are already shaping the course of our lives and obviously will impact civic space. So the future of the mandate for civic space should also create space to focus on mapping out the regional situation and tangible strategies to better incorporate the voice of women's movements.
Very important points. Thank you so much. Claudia, I'll turn to you, and then I'm going to go to some of the Slido questions and then open up to all panelists. But Claudia, please.
So I wanted to focus not only on accountability, because it's actually key, and we all know that that's very important. But I would like the mandate to look on regulations. Mr. Gilmore talked a lot about the regulations in the EU, and I think we are all seeing to this. But I think that we need to find also an equilibrium between regulations and freedom of expression. We don't want the regulations to go all the way like in Nicaragua, that just approve a law that basically is going to control the access to cyberspace, even to those of us that work from outside the country to support human rights defenders. So we need an equilibrium. We need to see this. We also need to see how freedom of association and assembly and in cyberspace is linked to our freedom of assembly in reality. So we need to find also a balance there. So we don't give a free rein for control in the real space. So because of pandemic, nobody can demonstrate outside in the streets. Let them do it in cyberspace. So we need to find a way where we can have also a balance, because cyberspace is a good space, but it's not the only space. And we still want to go to the streets, and we still want to form associations and move around. But just let me point to another part, and this is specifically address one of the challenges women have on accessing cyberspace. While being in the street is relatively inexpensive, being in cyberspace is expensive. In many countries, access to internet is not easy, and it's not cheap, and it's not even available in many places of the country. So that's another, and I know in the European Union there's talk about freeing or making more accessible internet, but I think that's a worldwide challenge, and especially if we are talking of association and assembly. And I just want to congratulate, because something like this webinar, the possibility of people joining all over the world on a activity of a mandate holder is possible because we are using cyberspace to assembly. So let us recognize and congratulate the positive use of this new dawn. I just want to end up with being mindful that in the Mayan calendar, today is 1 Akbal. Akbal is the sign of the dawn, and number 1 is the beginning of the dawn. So I think that this is the beginning of the dawn for the next 10 years, and it's also for our humanity, an opportunity to get it right this time, as your excellencies have pointed out before.
What wonderful remarks. Thank you so much. And as you said, we have this opportunity. It's hard with hundreds of people to participate online, but we do have some questions through Slido, and I'm going to turn to those now. The most upvoted question is the following: how can states support civil society in contexts where human rights defenders and their organizations are seeing routes to foreign assistance being cut off or even criminalized? So this whole issue around international funding of HRDs and civil society. Who would like to respond to that question, please? Special Representative Gilmore, do you have thoughts on that, or Special Rapporteur Voulet?
Yes, I do have both
Please.
thoughts on it, both.
Please. Thank you.
Yeah, both thoughts on it and experience of what is being described. We are increasingly seeing in many countries, first of all, a clampdown on what is called foreign funding of civil society, beginning with cases the making illegal of the funding of international organizations and of local organizations. And we see that very much as part of a pattern of the limiting of the civil society space and of the exercise of increasingly authoritarian tendencies in many countries. That is something that is going to have to be increasingly addressed over the next period of time. I think we have to see it in the context of freedom of assembly, freedom of association, and it is very, very much a priority for the European Union. It is something that we are addressing in the new action plan on human rights and democracy that we will be agreeing and launching shortly, and it is an issue and an area that we will be giving increasing attention to.
Thank you for paying more attention to that. We deeply appreciate it. Special Rapporteur Voulet, would you like to comment on the international funding issue?
Yes, I think this has been also one of the main challenge and also main concern for the mandate over these decades. In particular, the restriction of civil society to access international funding on using the pretext of some civil society member being the agent of international international country or some powers. And I think in particular in this context, it's really important that while at the same time many donor countries will be supporting some countries that are still, I mean, in terms of development, I still have a bad, maybe human record that is not acceptable. It's important also to link my way, what the state can do. It's important also to link the fact that if states still have this kind of law that restricts the access to the funding, then the state itself should face those restrictions at the international level. Because if you don't allow civil society to be able to access to this funding, you should not be also able to access the same funding at the international, because states should be the one that have means. Civil society that supports vulnerable people doesn't have means. Civil society don't control natural resources. So limiting this kind of access to the funding, where you can also see some donor country continue to fund even some country that have this limitation. And I say always sometimes it's lost investment, because at the same, if you are not able to put and to strongly push back on this, then you are investing in a country where resources cannot reach those who are most in need, need most these resources, and those who are marginalized. And for me, it's important, and I think the next decade, in particular with this COVID time, this is what I reiterate again, that we have also to be able also to ensure that, in particular during this COVID time, civil society continue to have access to the funding, but also continue also to have access to long-term funding, which is important for their work, because the right to funding for me is integral part of association. If you want people to be associate, to be able to do their work, they have also to have access. An association without funding will not be effective. So for me, it's important to continue to focus on that.
Hey, let's make this a conversation, bring in some other voices. For example,
yeah,
Claudia.
Doug, I'd like to just add to what Clement has just said, and I deeply appreciate what he's just said, and he's been pointing this out in his reports. You know, first of all, it's not just a question of having resources. I know I am a human rights defender, and I know that the first and foremost concern that I have is to safeguard my autonomy and my independence from governments, because the kind of work that we do, we cannot afford governments to infringe on our autonomy in any way. So this restriction that governments, and this is true, especially in my region, South Asian governments are totally, all of them, doing the same thing. And I think it's very important that we also understand that this is a way of limiting the autonomy and independence of human rights communities in their countries that governments are doing this. I would also like the Special Representative Gilmore to listen to what we are saying. Donors, by and large, are surrendering to governments on these issues and are restricting our ability to access funding by asking us to follow some of the very restrictive and limiting legislation and policies that governments are at the moment employing. So I would like the donor community also to consider this. This is not a question of national sovereignty or internal affair of countries. This is a human rights issue that transcends such sensitivities of governments.
Thank you, Special Representative Gilmore. Your name, so you have a right to respond. But first, I want to turn to Claudia and Mireille to see if they have anything they wish to contribute. Claudia?
Well, yeah, thank you. I wanted to focus in one part of the question that said criminalized. And that's key on the discussion for the governments, because how does funding get restricted is through the restriction or the criminalization of the right of association. And that is happening a lot through cyberspace on defamation and slandering, and then created a stigma. So the government and non-state actors in this, we have companies working on this, entrepreneurs trying to push this idea that they're the unfundable, conflictive, or whatever name they want to give. So we need to focus more on what the organizations are doing and recognize that in many cases, the ones that are really working on change are the ones that don't have a legal right to be an association because they have been restricted by dictators, or they are being restricted by laws like anti-money laundering laws. So there's a lot of little tricky ways that you can stop an organization of legally being able to receive funds. And then we have all the issue about the Lisbon Treaty and how states can decide who and what is funded in their own government, on the other states. So I'll leave it like that.
Thank you. No pressure, but I just want to ensure that Mireille and Special Representative Gilmore have a chance to respond if they wish on this, and then I'll turn to the second Slido question. First, Mireille.
Yeah, I can just quickly just add and really echoing what everyone had already said, but the reality on the ground is the restriction of civic space hits unevenly. So we already have an issue. So more than ever, I believe that this is an opportunity for us to define a new and more inclusive future, bringing women's movement at the table to address their needs. I mean, my understanding is like a lot of the proposed actions on top of the funding issues, resources issues, they've not even been met by our government. So how do we ensure that the next 10 years, we impose, those strong pose a strong mandate for our government and the special rapporteurs and all the stakeholders involved really push forward those agendas. We're being a little bit repetitive, talking about the same issues and over, but now it's about pushing forward all of these recommendations and proposed actions that are still there in our government tables.
Thank you, Special Representative Gilmore. Would you wish to contribute?
Well, I think I was mentioned in the context of hoping that I was listening to the points that were being made, and I most certainly am. And I am listening because I identify very much with what is being said. The clampdown on foreign funding, if I can put it that way, has a practical implication for the EU's funding and the funding by our member states of civil society organizations and of human rights projects of various kinds, for a start. Secondly, what we are seeing is not just a threat to the independence of human rights organizations, but in some cases to their very existence in some countries, or their ability to actually function at all, which is of very considerable concern to us. The issues that have been raised about how donor countries should respond is certainly something that we're giving a lot of attention to. There's been one case in recent times where we have redirected or refocused funding from government to civil society, where there has been a clampdown on civil society organizations. And I might add also that it is not just in the area of donor activity in that traditional sense, but it is also in the context of our trade agreements with some of the countries concerned, and I mentioned that in my opening remarks. So these are issues certainly that Not only do I hear what is being said, but these are issues that we're giving a lot of attention to at the moment.
Thanks so much for your thoughtful response. And for the audience, this is a little more interesting, just having serial presentations, but really to have a conversation, and that's the point. And toward that end, I'll turn to the second upvoted question on Slido, and it follows. What do panelists see as driving forces behind so many governments narrowing civic space, including peaceful protest, and how can we all address these root causes? So what are the drivers of the constraints, and what can we do about them? Special Rapporteur Voulet, may I turn to you first? What are a couple of those drivers, but maybe even more importantly, what do we do about them?
Thank you very much, Doug. I think this is very important question that also summarizes the whole issue of the restriction of civic space. And I think there are so many dimensions that we can highlight as well. We need also to kind of separate where some countries where we talk about being in country that is an authoritarian regime, where, for example, one of the main objectives of many governments is to avoid civil society participation to be criticized in order to continue to hold the power. In such government, we know also that the closing of the civic space have really, the main objective is to keep power. It's the issue of power in the country where you see that the opposition parties are weakening because of laws that do not allow them, for example, to play their role as a counterpart, as a monitoring of what government is doing, as also challenger for the government, where you see that opposition is completely cracked down. The only voice that citizens continue to have in order to make sure that their voice are heard is through civil society that raise concern. That's through civil society that raise the community, the lack of access to water, the lack of access to opportunities, the lack of access to the health. It's only civil society. And most of the time, civil society in such country will be seen as playing political role because the lack of this space of political party. And we have this country, and we have also other countries that I will say, where you see that in any type of challenge that country are facing, one of either their response is to restrict the space. We saw also the restriction in some of democratic countries recently. That's because there is a challenge, that democracy itself is challenged in terms of how the democracy is offering economic opportunity, the increase of inequalities, but also some of the unrest that we see, demonstration that we see happening in Europe even. And one of the things that surprised me, and we raised that in many times, and the European Union also was able also to call some of these countries to respect their obligation, is that some of these countries resort to the repression even for the protests, while we never think that such thing can happen. And you can see, and for me, I put it in a way that some of the countries were not necessarily prepared to see that certain unhappiness can rise from their own country. And we have those kind of type of the thing. But the good thing in some of these countries is that you still have effective remedies that can address those things. You still have also the level of cooperation that those countries also offer to the international body to be able to come. And I think we need to analyze this diversity. But in overall, I think also that in many cases, it's because also in many countries, people see civil society as disturbing their own interests, that they just want to be look like the national interest. If not, I don't see any reason why a government that should be listening to civil society that can convey to them how society, communities are feeling, can repress such voice. If it's not just they don't want to hear that, they want only to pursue a political interest that is not in the interest of the national interest itself. That's what I will add here.
Thank you. We'll have about another 6 minutes left in this panel, and I want to make sure everyone has a chance to speak. So in a minute or two, how would you respond to how we should address the drivers of closing civic space? In terms of the order, I'll go to Mireille, Special Representative Gilmore, Hina Jelani, and then Claudia. So, great, please.
Yes, quickly. Thank you so much, Doug. I will be straight to the point. If we really want to broaden the space for women to act and demand the rights, women's rights movement in the diversity has to be involved. We have to start addressing matters that many on the continent aren't keen to interrogate. Formal power structure that are even, often closed and inaccessible to all of us. Increasing diplomatic and political pressure on repressive government, as Clément had mentioned, and to always include discussions on women's rights in every dialogue and consultation. And just also kind of to add into Clément's mandate moving forward, what we want to see that for him to prioritize coordinated actions on the ground and every single visit, consultations, meeting with women's organizations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Special Representative Gilmore, please.
Well, the question is about what's driving it. And I think what's driving it is the concept of government or governance. If you think government and governance is about power, the exercise of power, the retention of power, and ruling over people, then you see civil society as automatically as opponents, as a threat, and something to be suppressed. On the other hand, if you see the concept of governance as a public service, then civil society is part of the governance process and a valuable part of it, because it enables a greater number of people to exercise their voice, to raise their concerns, and to contribute in a positive way, sometimes by criticism of what is being done. Some of these issues are not unknown in Europe, as has been pointed out. But I think what is important in Europe is that we have, for example, within the European Union treaties, the fundamental freedoms are guaranteed. It's in the Charter of Fundamental Rights. All our member states are part of the Council of Europe and the European Convention on Human Rights and have access to the European Court. So remedies are available. That's really just my observation on the question.
Thank you for these important observations. Hina Chalana, please.
I think I will just say that we have to understand that governments will always view civil societies who have successfully pursued a public agenda, a public welfare agenda, as hostile forces, because governments are becoming more and more intolerant of dissent. And I think it's important for the diplomatic community to engage with such governments and to make them understand that their prestige in the international community is lowered when their civil societies become weak or are extinguished totally because of the action of the government that drives them of resources or places curbs on their ability to carry out their work for the defense of human rights. I also think that Clément had a good suggestion to give, that aid grant must be in some ways made conditional or proportionate to the ability of civil societies to benefit from foreign funding as well. So these are some of the things I think that people need to understand. And remember also that under Article 2 of the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights Convention, of financial international cooperation is a part of human rights regime. So this is something that governments have to understand, that is not just meant for states. This is meant for anyone who is promoting and protecting human rights, which is includes the civil society.
Thank you, Claudia.
So I just want us to focus in the immense need we have to redefine what also dialogue is in these cases, as trying to go into another way of seeing governance is what does it mean to have dialogue when people have taken the streets, people have grievances. And many times international community ask of those that have used the right to protest to be nice in dialogue. And that's not dialogue. It also almost always what governments do and diplomatics do is they find people that can agree with them, and hence closing the space for the people that are the one affected by the economical drivers, the racial inequality, women rights inequality. So we need to focus more on dialogue. And one of the ideas is we really need to get into the 169 ILO convention, and this need to consult previously of any public policy that's being implemented. And that is key for me on going forward and guaranteeing that when we exercise the right of a peaceful assembly, it doesn't turn out to be a riot because of the closure of space.
I want to thank all the panelists for agreeing to have this conversation with us. Your comments were tremendously enlightening and we're deeply appreciative to you. In terms of feedback on the Slido poll, for those who are interested, when we asked what's the biggest challenge, 27% said rising authoritarianism, 19% said the demonization of protesters, and 15% said the after effects of COVID emergency decrees. I should say in my country, the United States, we have probably all three. It's a pleasure to be able to join with you today. I'll now turn it over to Special Rapporteur Clément Foulet for closing remarks. But again, thank you all.
Thank you very much, Duke. I want also to start by thanking you for this excellent moderation. I want also to thank the panelists for really useful and important contribution that also will help the mandate to move forward for the next 10 years. I want also to thank the countries that also participate and those who also make these events possible. And I want also to say that, and also all of my team that also helped me to really put this together, and they are also online, and you can see them all. Thank you also for your work, for your dramatic work, and thanks all of you for really continue to support the mandate, and also the OSHR that provide us the support that we need to continue to fulfill, and we hope that this support will continue in future. I want also to say in closing that as all of us can notice, we are in 2020 show us that we are moving in very tough and difficult time for the next 10 years. And we know that the only way for us, for governments, to be able also to address the rising inequality, the climate change, the COVID-19 pandemic, the only way to address the issue of development, the implementation of the SDGs, is also to ensure that people participate, that people feel that all the programs that are designed is designed for them, is also designed with them to be able to move forward. That is important also to secure the enjoyment of this right, because this right is central for the people participation. It's central for people to organize themselves. It's central also to people to secure their own future. If we are not able to ensure that these rights become the right that people enjoy every day to participate in political life, we will again start regretting that our democracy and our civic space is shrinking. I want also to make a call today that we need to bring power to people, because we are moving in very difficult time, and we are already seeing some of the repression that is coming up. Some of government that are equipped themselves to really counter protest. And I want to invite them to invest a lot of this funding to secure the community well-being. The only way you can address that is to ensure that people are able to be here. People are able to enjoy their basic rights. Spending billions of dollars to equip yourself to buy facial recognition technology, while you have the capacity to bring water to the citizen, to have the capacity also to ensure that people are able to secure their right to food, to secure their right to a good environment, but also to enjoy basic democracy rights. I think it's important today to think about where it's important for state to invest in order to build a peaceful society. And my call will be always to continue to show the state that this right is the right that helps community to participate. It's not a lecture. It's important. And civil society work today, we need to recognize that. We need to ensure that we own this and we have them as a partner. As I mentioned in my 10 principle, there is no country that will overcome challenges that we have foreseen without ensuring that civil society is a partner in this battle. And I want to thank all of you. And I hope that when we come back in the next 10 years, we will be celebrating more enjoy issue. We will be celebrating that our world is free from authoritarian, is free from restriction. Thank you very much for joining us. And thank you also for your thoughts and for your contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Clement, and thank you so much, Douglas, for such a good moderation of this session. This is something that we were all looking forward to, and I'm sure we're all going satisfied.